under that sixth event, we're going to tell you Martin Luther King Jr. versus Black Power. We're going to tell you a couple things. And before we get into this, I want you to get into your notebook and pull out, if you would, this particular handout that I gave you, 1967, Welcome to Mississippi. And just put it flat on your desk and don't look at the picture on the back yet. Okay? So pull out this 1967. And I'm just going to give you some notes here. And I probably wouldn't take a bunch of notes that I'm telling you here. I'd wait till we read the article and use the article as your notes. Okay? But I'll tell you what happened. So we want this one right here. Okay, 1967, Welcome to Mississippi. Might be, I think I gave it to you. This one right here. I gave it to you quite a while ago, so pull that thing out. Well, let me tell you the story first, then we'll read this. And again, I don't think you have to take a bunch of notes here, because we'll get it out of the reading, but I just want to tell you the story. In 1967, one single event pushed the black society into a new philosophy of civil rights known as Black Power. This is what kind of turned the tide. And on June 6, 1967, do you remember James Meredith? Okay, he was coming back to Mississippi after spending some time in Africa and Columbia Law School. And he decided to make a journey from Memphis, Tennessee to Jackson, Mississippi on foot. And the reason he wanted to walk it is because he wanted to promote black voter registration and reduce the fears that black people had about registering to vote. So he was pushing that. And he was going to walk 220 miles, and during the time of his march, several people joined with him and walked with him from Memphis, Tennessee to Jackson, Mississippi. Well, as you can imagine, cars of angry whites dogged him along Highway 51, wildly swerving in his direction as he walked. Suddenly, from the bushes, a man's voice comes out, James, James, I only want James Meredith. Meredith hears it, turns towards the voice, gunshots shatter along the road. More than 60 shotgun pellets penetrate Meredith's head, neck, back, and legs. Aubrey James Norvell was apprehended. He was charged with this deadly assault on Meredith. He was tried and convicted. He spent 18 months in jail for his assault on Meredith. Dr. King, Stokely Carmichael, and other black leaders continued the march for him. And by the time they reached Jackson, they had 18,000 marchers. And the incident involving James Meredith provoked many black leaders to support which philosophy? King or Black Power? Black Power. Okay, good. Well, let's get this out, and I want to read it to you because it's kind of an interesting story. There had been thunder when they last met. James Meredith and Ole Miss, fall of 1962. Meredith becomes the first black person to enter the University of Mississippi, a bold-fisted challenge to discriminatory admissions policies in America's colleges. Meredith's challenge meets a rage of resistance, rioting, killings, so much so that Meredith is under constant federal guard during his time at the university. With his graduation in 1963, the two-year duel lapses, but Mississippi would remember. June 6, 1967, Meredith is coming home after time in Africa and New York's Columbia Law School. Home to Mississippi, on foot, walking alone and unarmed through some of the most remote and racially unsettled counties in the state. It's a 220-mile stretch from Memphis, Tennessee to Jackson, Mississippi. He is making his solitary journey to promote black voter registration and to combat the fears blacks feel about living and traveling freely in Mississippi. My objective was to expose all persuasive fear that existed. You had 1 million blacks in Mississippi, 12,000 registered to vote. Now this was 2 years after Johnson signed the voting rights bill, but still no one had registered to vote. Even though Johnson had signed a bill saying that blacks have the right to vote and all they had to do was go and sign the book, most blacks still didn't sign the book. Now it wasn't because they didn't want to, it was because they were afraid of the consequences. They didn't know what would happen. Before, when they tried to push the point, someone would come out on the courthouse lawn and shoot them. They didn't know for sure whether there would be the same consequences. The question was, had we changed or hadn't we changed? Memphis, only 12 miles from Mississippi and once a giant kingpin kingpin of the Cotton Empire, is the starting point. People are attracted to his mission. A black soldier, a Memphis businessman, a minister from New York spontaneously take up the march with him, all on the basis of an inspiring chance meeting. Meredith is a compelling figure, helmeted, carrying an ebony and ivory walking stick, a gift from an African tribal chieftain. He walks past the hopeful and the hate-filled. Occasional groups of blacks dot the roadside with quiet support and prayers, even as cars full of angry whites dog him along Highway 51, wildly swerving in his direction. It is a continual intimidation. Threats of blind anger pour out. I hope the hell you die before you get there. He walks on. It is a hot, sultry afternoon. The heat shimmers above the steamy asphalt highway. Photographer Jack Thornell is covering the march for the Associated Press. We were leapfrogging with our cars, just staying a little ahead of him. From the bushes, a man's voice speaks quietly. James, James, I only want James Meredith. Meredith turns toward the voice in the bushes and gunshot ricochets along the road. The other marchers sprawl out on the highway. What alerted us was the first shot. I think it was a warning shot to scare everyone else away. I hopped out of the car and started taking pictures. Now 2 successive blasts shatter the stillness. Meredith falls, writhing on the asphalt. From the brush skirting Highway 51, a man is apprehended, whom neighbors describe as a very nice man, as nice a neighbor as you could ask for. Meredith is rushed to Memphis Hospital. Emergency surgery will carve 60 shotgun pellets from his head, neck, back, and legs. For this deadly assault on James Meredith, Aubrey James Norvell will spend 18 months in jail. Dr. Martin Luther King, Stokely Carmichael, and Dick Gregory and other black leaders continue the march. By the time they get to Jackson, they are 18,000 strong. The march will give rise to a new phrase, Black Power. Now turn your paper over. The attacker is actually visible in the top photograph, his head and chest rising from the embankment to the left of Meredith, who is looking back at his assailant. Can you imagine that? The point of this handout is this is where Black Power really starts to take off. People are going to change their philosophy. So it's very important that we continue the lecture by telling you a couple other things. This incident in 1967 involving James Meredith leads to the formation of a militant organization called the Black Panthers. So after this event in 1967, radical blacks get together and they form a militant organization. What's militant mean? What's that? They're going to be gun-wielding people, bomb-wielding people. They're going to be militant. They're going to be very aggressive and violent in their actions. And this group is known in history as the Black Panthers. And it was founded, anybody know where it was founded? What city? They have a professional football team there. It gets kind of crazy once in a while when they have games there. Not very good, but yes, say it. Oakland, California. Oakland, California is where the group was founded. It was a very radical, violent group. It was founded in Oakland, California, and it was led by 2 radical black men, Huey Newton and Bobby Seale. Now I actually have a picture of Bobby Seale up there above the shade here. That's a return address from something he sent one time when he lived and went to Temple University in Philadelphia. So that's his handwriting there, and that's Bobby Seale up above the screen. Now, one time they asked Huey Newton what he thought about the Black Panthers, and he said, quote, "Political power comes through the barrel of a gun." That was his philosophy. Huey Newton once made the comment concerning the Black Panthers that, quote, "Political power comes through the barrel of a gun." Now, of the Black Power movement, the Black Panthers were the most noticeable or most noteworthy group that supported Black Power. So the Black Panthers are the most publicized and significant group in the United States that advocated the Black Power movement. Now, last thing we're going to talk about today, and this will definitely be on your test, is the philosophical differences between Martin Luther King Jr.'s philosophy of civil rights and Black Power. Here's the difference, and you need to know this pretty much word for word. So I'm going to give you 4 comparisons of Martin Luther King's philosophy of nonviolent civil rights acts and the new black power philosophy. And yet I think when you hear these, you'll understand the absolute polar opposite that they have resulted in. Number one, Martin Luther King Jr. believed in a non-violent approach to civil rights. We should already know that. Okay? Martin Luther King Jr. believed in a non-violent approach to civil rights. A non-violent approach to civil rights. I'm just a Jesse James. Don't shoot me in the back when I'm straight in this picture. Black power believed in armed self-defense. So while Martin Luther King believed in a non-violent approach to civil rights, the Black Power movement believed in armed self-defense. That's number one. Martin Luther King, non-violent approach to civil rights. Black Power, armed self-defense. Number two, Martin Luther King Jr. believed in the integration of blacks and whites into the civil rights movement, right? Matter of fact, a lot of these people, the whites outnumbered the blacks. They were college students, many of them. We told you that. So his philosophy was we're going to integrate blacks and whites into the civil rights movement. Black Power obviously believed in total separation of blacks and whites. So if you were going to go to a Black Power rally, there would be no white people there supporting civil rights. So number two again, Martin Luther King Jr. believed in the integration of blacks and whites. The Black Power movement, total separation of blacks and whites. Number three, Martin Luther King Jr. believed in working with the system. He believed in working with the system. Martin Luther King Jr. believed in working with the system. Black Power believed in preparing for revolution. Preparing for revolution. So number three, while Martin Luther King Jr. believed in working with the system, the Black Power movement believed in preparing for revolution. And number four piggybacks a little bit on number two. Martin Luther King Jr. believed in including whites in the civil rights movement, and the Black Power movement believed in excluding. So when you look at number two, it's more that he didn't want black and whites together at all. Black Power. Would they want blacks and whites in the same schools, according to number two? No, so I kind of got ahead of myself. So number two, really, Martin Luther King believed in the integration of black and whites. The Black Power movement believed in total separation. Number four, Martin Luther King Jr. believed in including whites in the civil rights movement, and the Black Power movement meant excluding them. So I kind of got them backwards, but you understand my point? In one instance, in number two, Martin Luther King believed in having blacks and whites together, for example, in public schools. Black Power would say no. And number four, Martin Luther King believed in including people, white people in the civil rights movement, and Black Power said excluding them. So that's kind of where we're at on that. Now, here's what we got left. We're going to talk about Martin Luther King and his philosophy of the Vietnam War. And then we're going to talk about his assassination. And then we're going to give you a profile on him, and then we're going to be done with this material. So we are probably looking at a test. What's the activity schedule this week? What's going on Thursday? Anybody going to be on Thursday? What's going on Thursday? State swimming, okay. So what's tomorrow? Tuesday? Yeah, we'll probably have a test, not Monday, but probably Tuesday of next week. Same day that your what are due? Biography. So what are due Wednesday? Ticket, raffle tickets, okay? Now, I want to explain something else to you.